Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle, and I'd like to thank you for joining us today for What Administrators and Principals Need to Know, Singapore Math and the Common Core, a Perfect Fit. We're very happy you could join us. Before we start, a little housekeeping. Because we have so many people with us today, we have placed all attendees on mute. Please feel free to use your chat window on the right-hand side of your screen to ask any questions. There will be a question and answer period at the end of the presentation where we will address questions received. This session is being recorded, and assuming no technical difficulties, you will receive the archive sometime tomorrow. Finally, at the end of the presentation, you will receive a short survey. Our goal is to provide additional complimentary webinars in the future. By filling out this survey, you will be helping us make that possible. Very quickly, a little bit about SDE. We at SDE believe educators have the most important job in the world. That's why it's our mission to empower pre-K to 12 educators across the country with sustained professional development solutions that are not only research-based, innovative, and rigorous, but practical, motivating, and fun. Our goal is to help you create extraordinary classrooms that prepare students for the evolving demands of the 21st century. Together, we can create extraordinary classrooms. Today's webinar is being presented by Robyn Silbey. Robyn works as a consulting math coach in Title I schools for 25 out of the 36 years she served Montgomery County Public Schools in Maryland. Robyn writes books, computer software, journals, magazine articles, and other supplemental educational materials. She visits districts and campuses around the country, assisting them in creating standards-based, student-centered mathematics programs that embrace the Common Core state standards for mathematical practice. A chronicle of Robyn's professional development strategies for raising teacher quality and student achievement in mathematics can be found in the USDE report, What the United States Can Learn from Singapore's World-Class Mathematics System and What Singapore Can Learn from the United States. She also presents workshops and seminars around the country on a variety of topics including problem solving, motivation, higher order thinking questions, number sense, speaking and writing in mathematics, and coaching strategies. Welcome, Robyn. I'll now turn the presentation over to you.
Thanks, Michelle. We have 3 goals today. We're going to compare the Singapore Math Framework with the Common Core Standards for Mathematical Practice. We're going to look at some specific Singapore math strategies and activities in the context of those standards for mathematical practice. And finally, we're going to share some proven documented processes for implementing those strategies in your building or district. I'd like to begin by taking a look at the Singapore Math Framework. If you look down at the bottom right of this particular screen, you can see the little circle that says TIMS World's Best. That is the trends in mathematics science and study, math and science study, an international exam that is given every 4 years, and Singapore has been at or near the top for at least the last 20 years. That's why it's so important to take a look at their framework. You can see that it centers around problem solving and is a pentagon. It has five sections. Skills and concepts are something that we are already pretty familiar with, but let's take a look at the other 3: attitudes, metacognition, and processes. Those attitudes include perseverance, confidence, appreciation, interest, and beliefs. Singaporeans want their children to appreciate and value mathematics, to persevere when they solve problems, and to have a genuine interest in math. Moving on to metacognition, Singapore children monitor their own thinking, and they think about their learning, how they're going to learn, and what they're going to learn. And finally, looking at the processes, that has to do with reasoning, communication, and connections. Those thinking skills and heuristics, or problem-solving ideas, they think about how they are going to solve problems and the strategies they're going to use, the applications, and modeling math, meaning taking math out of the classroom and using models for math in the real world. Enter the Common Core State Standards. We've had these for a couple of years, and at last, like Singapore, we have a national curriculum. It is currently in 44 out of the 50 states, but even the states that aren't involved with Singapore, with Common Core State Standards, are doing things that look a little like it. In my opinion, the centerpiece of the Common Core Standards are the standards for mathematical practice. They are close to the very beginning of the standards document to reflect their importance. They are the processes and proficiencies that maximize students' deep and lasting understanding. There are 8 standards for mathematical practice. Make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. Reason abstractly and quantitatively. Construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. Model with mathematics. Use appropriate tools strategically. Attend to precision. Look for and make use of structure. And look for and express regularity in repeated reasoning. You see the little piece of art there of the sauce on the main dish. It used to be thought that the processes of mathematics, or the process standards when we had the old PSSM, were the sauces that went on the main dishes of the content. That's actually been reversed now. Those processes, these 8 standards for mathematics, are indeed the main dishes, with the content being the sauces. For example, if we take a look at Standard 1, make sense of problems and persevere in solving them, we know that kids are going to make sense of problems in 1st and 2nd grade that involve addition and subtraction. In 3rd and 4th, multiplication and division. In 5th, fractions, and so on. They are going to be making sense of problems and persevere in solving them K through 12. The only thing that's going to change is at each grade level, the content that they are going to be making sense of will change. So this is the one thing, these 8 standards are what's going to take the kids all the way through K to 12. I'd like to take a closer look at those standards for mathematical practice. Each one of those standards begins with the phrase, mathematically proficient students will. The first one, mathematically proficient students will make sense of problems and persevere in solving them. That means we want the kids to be able to think to themselves about what the problem is about and look for different points of entry in terms of solving them. Standard 2, mathematically proficient students will reason abstractly and quantitatively. That means that instead of number crunching, we want students to be able to understand the meaning of the numbers and the units and use them to help them solve the problem rather than just doing the computation. Within that standard are 2 terms, decontextualize and contextualize. Decontextualizing means I'm going to read that problem, I'm going to make sense of it, and the number sentence or equation that I make is going to take the context out of the problem and just make it a mathematical one using symbols. When I finish solving the problem, I'm going to put my solution back into the problem. I'm going to contextualize it and make sure it makes sense. Standard 3, mathematically proficient students will construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. That means we are going to provide students with ample opportunities to share their thinking and compare their strategies and make connections between them. Some students may use repeated addition, others will use multiplication, others will use skip counting. All 3 are connected, all 3 are viable, and we want kids to hear each other's ideas. Standard 4, mathematically proficient students will model with mathematics. That means students are going to relate math to the things that happen in real life. So when they are shopping, when they are getting gas, when they are when they are cooking, everyday things. These are models that students will understand as they take mathematics out of the classroom. Standard 5. Mathematically proficient students will use appropriate tools strategically, and that involves using the right manipulatives or using manipulatives appropriate to them and their thinking. Please note that it includes technology, those new virtual manipulatives that have become more valuable with each passing day. We want to expose our kids to those and get them comfortable using them. Standard 6, attend to precision. We want students to be able to check their work for accuracy and use the correct units for measure. But in addition to that, we want them to communicate with precision. We want them to be able to use the correct mathematics terminology so that other students can understand what they're thinking. Standard 7. Mathematically proficient students will look for and make use of structure. This has to do with patterns that they find as they're doing math. For example, students may find that 3 plus 7 is the same as 7, has the same sum as 7 plus 3. But that extends not just for math facts, but any number pair regardless of size, whole numbers, fractions, decimals. We want students to understand commutativity. That is one of the structures of mathematics that we are speaking of in Standard 7. And finally, Standard 8. Mathematically proficient students will look for and express regularity and repeated reasoning. This is the one where the kids look for shortcuts. For example, if students are dividing 10 by 3, they may find that the quotient is 3.333, and at some point they're going to see that it continues forever. That's the kind of shortcut that we want kids to be able to recognize so that they're not wasting 3 sheets of paper dividing. I'd like for you to take a look at the Singapore standards or the Singapore framework and the standards for mathematical practices. Please take 30 seconds, I'm going to time it, 30 seconds, to take a look at the similarities you see between these two, and then we'll talk about them. I hope you had an opportunity to see some of the parallels here. Let's look at processes, the reasoning, communication, and connections, thinking skills and heuristics, and the applications and modeling. That really addresses the mathematical practices 3, where students construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. It's right there, that communication. 4, the modeling with mathematics, applications and modeling, again, right there. 5, using the appropriate tools strategically, and we want the kids to be able to communicate using those tools. And 6, attending to precision. We want to make sure that kids communicate clearly and precisely. Looking at metacognition, monitoring of one's own thinking, and the self-regulation of learning really addresses many of these standards. 1, making sense of problems and persevere in solving them, meaning that the kids are going to be monitoring their thinking as they think about those problems. It also attaches to 2, standard 2, reasoning abstractly and quantitatively, and 3, constructing those viable arguments. In addition to that, metacognition also addresses mathematical practices 7 and 8, where students are going to be mindful as they look for structures and regularity and repeated reasoning when they solve problems. Finally, we'll take a look at the attitudes. That perseverance is right there in Standard 1, making sense of problems and persevering in solving them. We want to make sure that students are challenged and don't shy away from that challenge and don't get frustrated. We really want to increase their threshold for working through something with a little tension. And Standard 3, constructing viable arguments and critiquing the reasoning of others. That has to do with the confidence in believing what you have done, an appreciation and interest in other people's ideas and views. You probably found many others that I didn't even mention, and I would be thrilled to hear about those later. On to the second goal. We want to evaluate specific Singapore math strategies or activities in the context of these standards for mathematical practice. The first one I want to touch upon is the movement from concrete to pictorial and then to abstract that is pervasive in all of the Singapore math books and their strategies. That really addresses many of the standards for mathematical practice. Right now, I would talk about Standard 2, reasoning abstractly and quantitatively, as students need to move from the concrete, something that they understand and can work with their hands or, of course, on the computer using technology. Once they understand that well, it's great to have students build the ability to model what they have done using pictures. I have mentioned to teachers many times that while we cannot take those concrete manipulatives with us to assessments, we do provide scratch paper, I think, in every state, so that students can draw pictures of those objects, which means that they have those virtual manipulatives or illustrated manipulatives with them all the time. And then, of course, moving there to the symbolic or the abstract. Let's look at some specific content standards. We'll begin in kindergarten, operations in algebra. Decompose numbers less than or equal to 10 into pairs more than one way. You will see one of the classic Singapore forms, which is the number bonds. As you can see, the two parts make a whole. And these, you can see with the lines how the two parts combine to make the whole. It's a beautiful visual representation of the relationship between parts and wholes. Please notice that in the standard that it says to record each decomposition by drawing or equation. If you look to the right at our example of the circles, please note the relationship between the small circles and the large circles. That would be 3, 2 with a whole of 5. How about the blue circles to the red circles? 4 and 1. And finally, the triangles to the circles. Well, there aren't any triangles, and that shows the number bonds 0 and 5. No triangles, 5 circles. This Singapore math strategy using the number bonds really beautifully addresses this kindergarten content standard. The number bonds, by the way, are there all the way through from early grades with this beginning part whole through larger numbers, missing number sentences where there's a question mark where that whole is, or a question mark where the part is for addition and subtraction, and then again later on for multiplication and division. Another standard another pair of standards are in first and second grade, numbers in base 10, and this this talks about how students need to understand that the two digits of a two-digit number represent tens and ones, and again, three-digit numbers, hundreds, tens, and ones. Singapore, this is a screen capture right from a primary mathematics book, and you can see that it shows a lot of different representations. At the top, it's just a drawing of some sticks put together. Please notice that the child is saying there are 3 tens and 4 more, 4 loose ones. Below that child, 3 dimes and 4 pennies, so the representation using money. The expanded notation, 30 plus 4. The word name. Then the tens and ones place value chart with the meaning under it. And finally, as we moved clockwise, the base 10 block representation. This is used in the upper grades as well. If you notice, 3 in numbers, in fraction numbers, we are understanding that a fraction is a number on the number line, representing fractions on a number line diagram, and using decimal notations. In this particular web that I've drawn, the center is 1 8/10, and you can see, moving clockwise again from the art, you see the model showing 1 8/10, the number line, expanded notation, the word name, the improper fraction, and the mixed number. Making these connections really allows students to understand each part more deeply as they understand the relationship between all of these different ideas. In 4th grade, this standard, numbers in base 10, involves division, finding whole number quotients and remainders using strategies based on place value. You are supposed to illustrate and explain using equations, rectangular arrays, and area models. When I begin to teach division, I use the base 10 blocks. I simply ask the kids if you can, I ask the kids to find the quotient of 402 and 3. You can see the regrouping part here and the use of place value as students move 100s block into each of the 3 circles, then regroup that final 100 into 10 tens, move 3 tens into each of the groups, regroup that final 10 so that there are 10 ones with a total of 12 ones, and then distribute those into the 3 groups so that the quotient of 402, is 134. This ties the concept of division in with place value in a very meaningful way for students. The crown jewel of Singapore math, in my opinion, is bar modeling. It is a problem-solving strategy that really addresses all 8 of the mathematical practices. Let's take a look at one. I have reminded teachers many times to allow their kids to read those problems to themselves just to simulate what it's going to be like on their formal state assessment. So, would you please read that problem to yourselves? We look at Rosa. She has a total of 336 shells. That represents the whole. She keeps 72 of the shells for herself. You can see the section there that shows what Rosa keeps. The remaining shells are distributed evenly amongst 6 friends, so the remainder of the bar is separated into 6 equal sections. Our job in this problem is to determine how many shells each friend receives. The bar models in Singapore Math do not necessarily put the words in there. I do. I believe that that really solidifies the comprehension issue to make sure the kids are looking at the same problem and capturing the words that are going to help them in the problem. Not keywords, but the contextual words, the situational words that will help them solve the problem. So, in looking at this completed bar model, I believe this demonstrates understanding, and it also yields a plan. The only thing that you can do at this point is to subtract the shells that Rosa keeps from her total amount to begin with. Once you've found that, divide by 6, because there are 6 friends, to find what each friend receives. Let's take a look at Andy's work. He has subtracted 72 from 336 and has divided, I would guess on another sheet of paper or using a calculator, the difference. He has divided that difference by 6 to find that there are 44 shells per friend. Our final goal this evening is to share some of the proven and documented processes for successfully implementing Singapore Math in your building or district. I facilitated actually a Singapore Math rollout in Montgomery County Public Schools beginning in the fall of 1999. 4 schools were appointed to participate in this. The purpose of the pilot, the sole purpose of the pilot, was to inform Montgomery County Public Schools new curriculum. They were doing research, and in order to do the research properly, they wanted 4 schools to actually take part and then be able to offer feedback about what worked in Singapore and what should be used in our new Montgomery County standards. I was in one of those 4 schools. The result of that, the result of our success, we started in the mid-50s in our state assessment. We rose to the low 90s, and we stayed there for the length of our study and then some. After 5 years, we were forced, and I really do mean that, we were forced to turn in our Singapore books because the curriculum had been written and used by by every other school in the county, and we had to get on board. But the professional development case study appears in this document released jointly by the American Institutes for Research and the U.S. Department of Education. If you can see at the bottom of the screen, all you have to do is go to my website under Publications, and you will have access to it. It is Appendix C, and it begins on page 182. It's all the way in the back. But it talks about all the things that we had to do to roll out some of these new and different and exciting strategies. I'd like to say right here that you don't need to purchase Singapore Math. You can use these strategies regardless of the program that you are using. Those number bonds will go anywhere in any grade. Bar modeling works no matter what series or what curriculum, whatever you're using. These strategies that we talked about today work throughout. The 5 big things that we did for the successful rollout of this program were demonstration lessons, co-teaching, weekly planning, a school focus on mathematics, and customized support for teachers who needed it. First, the demonstration lessons. I found at the beginning of my journey that I was doing demonstration lessons, but the teachers weren't necessarily watching completely. They were busy doing other very important things in their classrooms. By using this lesson observation form, we asked the teacher to pay attention through the lesson by focusing not only on the teaching, but on what the students were learning. It held the teacher accountable throughout the math block, and if you look at the bottom of that form under next steps, I've invited the teacher to try one of the strategies that they learned in their classrooms on a regular basis. I found that using this lesson observation form really helped my teachers. Once they filled it out during my demonstration lesson, we would sit down and debrief, and the teacher had very focused notes that described what she saw in terms of my behavior and the students' behaviors. This completed form made our discussions very valuable and worthwhile. You can download this form on my website under Downloads. Just go to robynsilbey.com, Downloads, and it's right there for you. In fact, I'm only showing you the first page. The second page of this observation form is looking for the standards for mathematical practice. You will see all 8 of the standards for mathematical practice listed with an area for teachers to be able to fill in where and when they see that during a demonstration lesson. A variation of this is a whole team lesson study where the coach teaches one class, the whole team observes, and then following that, the team sits down and does a variation of lesson study where each teacher brings something very different and unique about what they saw in the lesson. Where a new teacher might be looking at every single move that the demonstration teacher makes, a more veteran teacher may be copying the board to look for a specific strategy such as bar modeling so that she can teach herself how to use that. An offshoot of that after a demonstration lesson may involve co-teaching. I've used 2 effectively. A, the teacher and coach decide who's going to do what, so the teacher may decide she wants to open and close the lesson, but she would like the coach to show a specific strategy, a technique, maybe to show the bar modeling or to show the relationship between the number bonds in single-digit numbers and in greater numbers. Or a less formal, which is a side-by-side coaching, where the teacher works through the whole lesson, the coach is there to pop in and say stuff or offer additional questions of the students as needed. One of the most critical parts of rolling out a program and new strategies is to assist the teachers in weekly planning. That weekly planning includes the new approaches to the familiar content embedded in what is already there. So whatever the teacher has already planned, if they're going to embed those number bonds or the webs or the different representations, that goes in there specifically. The strategy supporting the Common Core standards and mathematical practices, if they are spelled out, if they are spelled out right there in the lesson plans, it's much easier. And although you see me do it, that's me, although you see me doing the typing, that is to ensure that the teachers' heads and minds are in the content and they are basically dictating. I'm nothing more than a recording secretary offering guiding questions or just steering them where they need to go if needed. Please notice the last bullet. Those big picture goals are really wrapped around the content standards. And we look at the big picture, that content standard, and we think about and talk about how to break that standard down into bite-sized daily lesson pieces. So that weekly planning is really driven by the coach, if at all possible, the teachers do it and the coach has input as needed. One other thing I'd like to say, I don't have a slide for it, but I just want to throw it out there. One of the wonderful things about having somebody, an instructional coach in the building as you're rolling out these strategies, is that they have a feel for the vertical movement of these strategies. So number bonds are taught in first grade, but in third and fourth grade, although teachers may not be familiar with number bonds, you know how to show the teachers how it applies and how students may have learned at earlier ages and how it's built upon in later grades. A school focus on mathematics. When we were doing our Singapore math pilot, we had staff meetings, people visited each other's classrooms, all kinds of opportunities, math nights, all kinds of opportunities, school-wide, community-wide, to make sure that parents and all staff members, art, music, phys ed, everybody knew what was going on, and there was a big focus on mathematics those years, which I think, in all fairness, contributed to the 40-point jump and the maintenance of that jump. Customized support has to be offered for teachers who would like additional support from an instructional specialist, an administrator, or a coach. That may mean more demonstration lessons. It may mean more focused observations, regular walkthroughs, all kinds of things that can help teachers build confidence and persevere in trying out these new strategies. I'd like to thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to turn this over to Michelle. I think we may have some questions and time for questions and answers.
Yes, we do, and in fact we have several questions that have come in. The first question is from Caroline, and her question is, how did you inform the parents about the changes in the math program back in 1999? Did you teach parents as well so they could help their children with their homework?
That is an excellent question. We notified the parents of the change, and we invited them in mid-year because we needed to get our feet wet and build some confidence. We invited them in mid-year for an evening PTA meeting. I actually facilitated that meeting. Then, later in the year and throughout the next few years, I was the math coach, remember. I had a monthly parent meeting during the school day. We happened to be fortunate in having an active PTA. Parents came in. We had a core group of, I'd say, 10 to 15 parents who would come in, and I would teach them the strategies that their children would be seeing in the coming month or 6 weeks or in the coming unit. That way, the parents would be really helpful allies in reinforcing what the kids were learning in school.
Great, thanks, Robyn. We have another question that has come in from Sophie, and she's asking, how do Singapore math strategies tie to middle and high school? And are there examples to use out there?
Great question. There are Singapore Math. It has now been extended through the middle school grades. I will tell you that that it is rigorous, as you probably know. The strategies, the bar modeling strategies, have been adapted in most of the American textbooks, if not all. They are called bar diagrams, and if you have an American series that's dated, I'd say 2012 and beyond, they have bar diagrams in them. So some of these Singapore Math strategies have really infiltrated, permeated, and become part of the American classroom culture. Yes, there are bar diagram problems and examples as I know, all the way through middle school, Algebra 1, and I believe beyond.
Okay, and another question. Are there specific software or apps that support Singapore Math strategies?
That's a wonderful question. I wish I could answer it. Unfortunately, I don't know. I mean, I wish I could tell you. And certainly it's something that when we finish this webinar, I will be Googling shortly thereafter so that I am ready with the answer to that question.
And we can include that in our follow-up so everybody can have access to that information.
That's terrific, Michelle. Thank you so much.
Sure. Let's see, another question from Patricia. How difficult was it to get all of your teachers on board with this when you were instituting it in your school? And how many PD hours did it take?
This was a directive coming from the superintendent. So the teachers were on board formally, all of them. Spiritually, they came in different intensities and speeds. Some teachers took to it like a duck to water. Other teachers who felt very successful using the strategies that they had, it took a little longer for them to come around. I will candidly share my own experience. As the math coach, it was my job to be the cheerleader. When I first looked at Singapore Math, the program that we instituted, I was skeptical, and there were certain things I looked at that didn't make a lot of sense to me, and by, I'd say, 10 to 12 weeks into the year, I came to realize that if I didn't understand it, I needed to study it more because I had a lot to learn. And I also want to say as a byproduct that the teachers genuinely enjoyed learning this. Not immediately, I'm not going to say that, but I am going to say in time they adored what they were doing, and it showed with the kids. And again, you know, you don't jump 40 points and stay there based on one silver bullet. It's a combination of things. And I think that the genuine joy that teachers had in finally understanding some of the concepts that they had simply memorized as youngsters, the fact that they finally understood it, made them believers of the strategies they were using, and of course that extended to the children. It was just infectious. I think you asked the second part to that question. Would you repeat it, please?
Actually, I think you did answer the complete question.
Okay, cool.
Thanks, Robyn. So let's go on to the next one. Where do teachers turn for help or assistance during the initial rollout of Singapore Math?
Well, that's a great question. Singapore Math, those folks using Singapore Math and Singapore Math strategies are all over the country, And I think it's something you could Google or reach out to people in your area. I know that there are pockets of people, charter schools and smaller school districts and maybe larger school districts that are implementing this all over the country. The other thing that I would suggest is to ask a consultant such as me or somebody else from Staff Development for Educators to come and work with your folks, or to work with the administration or the leadership team so that they can, trainer of trainers kind of thing. And reach out to other math coaches, or as in my case, as the math coach, I needed to learn it. I remember the other part of that question that I wanted to address. How many hours? 1 second, please. Our teachers put, I don't want to scare you, but I need to be honest, our teachers put a tremendous amount of time into learning these new strategies, because it isn't just enough to know them, to understand them. You need to understand them well enough to be able to respond to any questions a kid might have, to extend the idea, to work backwards and remediate when necessary. So it isn't just, I understand this well enough to be able to do the problems in the book. You have to understand it well enough to be able to expect the unexpected.
Okay, great. And another question that's come in, where can I find printed resources on Singapore Math?
If you are using, I believe that one place you can go is singaporemath.com. I believe that Staff Development for Educators, SDE, has some materials, and there are other publishing companies that have materials for Singapore Math. It's I think they're pretty popular out there to look for.
Great. And Crystal Springs Books is also another option. That's a great option for printed resources as well.
Thank you. And that is Crystal Springs is, if I'm not mistaken, the publishing arm of Staff Development for Educators. Is that right, Michelle?
Correct. Yes.
Yes. And that's when I said SDE, I meant Crystal Springs. So thank you for clarifying that for me.
Great, great. Okay, well, we're just about out of time. If we did not get to your question, we'll be posting all questions and answers to our LinkedIn group. If you go to LinkedIn, select groups, and search Staff Development for Educators, we will also post a link to the discussion on Facebook and Twitter. We hope you enjoyed this presentation. As a special thank you, we'd like to offer you a 10% discount if you register for any seminar or conference by April 24th, 2013, and mention VIP code WEB327. You may be interested in Singapore Math, strategies that work in every classroom. This seminar will be held in Louisiana, Maine, New Mexico, New York, Oklahoma, and Texas. You can also bring Robyn or any of the topics discussed today to your school or district. For more information, call 1-877-388-2054. Again, we hope you enjoyed the presentation, and we hope you have a great day.
Thank you, Michelle. I am thrilled that all of you were able to visit today and to spend time during the dinner hour with Michelle and me. And I hope you learned a few things and got some questions answered. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to Michelle or anybody at SDE, and we'd be happy to help you out.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Robyn.
Thank you very much. Thanks all.